How many discounts does USAA Auto Insurance offer? Too many to say here. Multi-vehicle discount, safe driver discount, new vehicle discount, storage discount, legacy.
How many discounts will you stack up? Visit USAA.com/auto discounts. Restrictions apply.
Introducing the new Volvo XC90 with 7-seat versatility, Google built-in, and advanced safety features for all your precious cargo. The new Volvo XC90, designed for life. Visit volvocars.com/US to learn more.
If you are interested in supporting this podcast and at the same time getting all my episodes ad-free, then please head to my website, 3dprintingbasicspod.com. Again, that's 3dprintingbasicspod.com. There you can find all the links to support me, my affiliate links, and as a perk, you can get all my episodes ad-free if you subscribe on Patreon, Spotify, or Apple Music. Again, all my links will be there, as well as a contact form if you have any questions. Thank you, and I hope you enjoy this episode. Hello, and welcome back to 3D Printing Basics. This is episode number 67, and in this week's episode, we're going to be talking about 3D printing in the summertime. We're going to be talking about how humidity and heat can really affect your 3D printing, some tips and tricks to help you have successful 3D prints in these conditions, as well as my personal experience with 3D printing, especially in Southern California, where we can reach triple-digit temperatures. Before we get into it, I just wanted to say thank you guys for all the support on the podcast. It really means the world to me. I had no idea when I started this a few years ago that it would get to this point, but I am eternally grateful for all the support that you guys have given me. So thank you guys so much. And with that being said, let's get right into today's episode. So the first thing I wanted to talk about is why summer is arguably the toughest environment to make successful 3D prints in. And that is, of course, because of the heat and humidity that comes along with these very, very high temperatures. In my area, it's usually a dry heat. We do definitely get some humidity here and there, but it's nowhere like Florida or other parts of the world where the humidity is just insanely off the charts. But with that being said, it does get to triple digits, as high as 110. I think 115 is the highest temperature I've ever seen in my lifetime here. So it definitely still gets pretty hot. And when the area that you're printing in gets hot, most of us have our 3D printers in our garage or just in an unventilated area. And when you're printing in an unregulated area like that, where the temperature is just rising and rising and there's nothing to keep it at a steady temp, and especially too when it gets dark at nighttime, the temperature can drop by quite a bit. And that fluctuation, and especially the heat itself, it really affects part cooling and bed adhesion, because the bed adhesion relies on a certain temperature for the bed to be in order to keep 3D printed parts sticking to the bed and have good bed adhesion. And when you have temperatures fluctuating a lot, especially over long multi-day prints, that causes the bottom layers that have been printed first to expand and contract as it goes through the temperatures around it, shifting, getting really hot, and then could be I don't want to say cold, but could be colder than it being 100 degrees in there, and that causes the layer adhesion to fail and for the parts to peel up or pop off the bed. And usually the corners go first, followed by the rest of the print, and then you have a beautiful spaghetti mess when you come back in the morning hoping that your print is good, just to find it all over the floor. And especially if you're printing with an enclosure, if you have something like a Bamboo Labs P1S that has a built-in enclosure and you're just printing regular PLA, this is definitely a problem that I've had. It can just get too hot, and then the PLA doesn't cool properly. It ends up drooping. It ends up sagging. Just the whole entire print, the detail looks terrible. It looks like you kind of hit it with a blowtorch in some spots, and everything is just sagging and looking terrible. And so that's definitely something to think about. If you have an enclosed printer, but you're in a really hot space, the enclosure could actually have a negative effect on the parts that you're printing. And if you are printing in a place where you do have some AC or air conditioning or some sort of temperature regulation, then the constant drafts from the airflow from the AC kicking on and kicking off, especially if a vent is pointed right at one of your printers, that can be a problem too, because you are having essentially another part cooling fan blowing directly on your piece when the printer and the settings don't account for it, and that could also lead to uneven cooling and layer adhesion failure in between the layers. So these are all definitely factors to consider. But when it's summertime, when the heat ticks up and the humidity rises, there is definitely going to be a lot of problems with continuing to get successful 3D prints. More so if you are in an unregulated temperature area where there's no air conditioning or heating or anything like that. This episode is brought to you by PCBWay. Ready to take your electronics projects to the next level? PCBWay offers everything you need, from custom PCBs to 3D printing and even CNC machining, all under one roof. They're trusted by engineers and makers worldwide for their exceptional quality and fast turnaround. And here's a special deal for listeners of 3D Printing Basics. Use the promo code 3D Printing Squared, SQUARED, to get $10 off your first order. Start your next project with PCBWay and see the difference for yourself. Head over to PCBWay.com today. And with that, I want to talk about my experience. I'm going to go back to last summer when I was just moved into my office and I didn't have any air conditioning in the upstairs mezzanine, where I had all my 3D printers and I had a big job. I remember it was taking several weeks to finish, but as I kept pulling parts off the print bed, I couldn't understand why everything was looking so bad. There were supposed to be high detail parts and everything was looking really terrible. It just looked like everything was drooping, everything was sagging, the layers were coming apart, and I couldn't understand for the life of me what was going on, because I thought that no air conditioning in that room would be a good thing, because I always thought that more heat means that the pieces would stick to the bed better, they would stay adhered, and they wouldn't pop off, because I thought that excessive cooling would lead to the part shrinking, and that's what caused it to pop off the bed. But it wasn't actually the layer adhesion that was affecting my prints. It was just the heat of that room. I remember in that room I had some temperature, I had some thermometers in there, and it would get up to 95 degrees in that room. And that being combined with the enclosures that I was using, because I had P1Ss, they all had enclosures. I was printing with the door closed. That caused the PLA to just be printing way too hot, and there wasn't enough cooling in there. There wasn't enough, the part cooling fans weren't doing enough, and that just caused the PLA to not cool quick enough, and that caused basically anything that was printing over any kind of area, whether there was supports or not, it was printing half on, half off, hanging in the air. It just caused everything to droop and sag, and every part that I pulled off looked terrible. And so I scrambled and got a mobile AC unit, and I kid you not, that fixed the entire problem immediately. As soon as I got the mobile air conditioning unit in there, I didn't even set it really cold, I would say. I'd probably set it to about 80 degrees just to maintain a constant temperature in there. And then the parts that I was printing and everything that I took off the bed, it looked fantastic, exactly like it should be. There were no problems. There was no new problems with bed adhesion. All the parts were looking great. The detail was amazing. And that was just a big lesson for me to learn that, you know, more heat doesn't always equal more good, especially with these filaments like PLA, where the melting temperature is a little bit lower than other filaments, and you're printing with the enclosure. Just all those factors combined together actually ended up hurting my prints. And it did definitely delay me. It probably took me a week longer than it should have to complete the job. But like I said, it was a tough lesson to learn. And among other things, I definitely learned that temperature regulation, whether you're in a place that gets really hot or a place that gets really cold, temperature regulation throughout the year is a very, very important thing in 3D printing if you want your parts to be consistent, turn out highly detailed, and structurally sound. So make sure wherever you may be putting your 3D printers that you are keeping it as temperature controlled as you can. It doesn't need to be, exactly 65 degrees all the time. If you can keep it generally in the same kind of temperature area, I try to keep it within 10 degrees. I basically just try to keep it in between 70 and 80 degrees at all times. And that has turned into my prints being very consistent. I haven't had any problems since last summer when I learned this lesson and kind of discovered it. Some other tips and tricks you could try if you're having problems printing in the summertime is filament storage, especially in these places where humidity is much more of a problem than just straight up heat. Filament storage with desiccant is going to be your best friend. It's going to be really, really important, because if you leave these filaments out in, say, your room or in the garage where windows get opened or there just is no insulation or temperature control of any kind, then the humidity gets in there, the water gets in the air, and then goes just straight into the filament, and that completely affects your prints and makes them that much worse. So make sure you have good filament storage. Make sure all your filament is dry too before you store it, because if you're storing wet filament, just the desiccant that you have in the wherever you're storing it isn't going to do the trick. It needs to be dried first, and the desiccant just keeps it dry. If you have a super wet spool, it's not necessarily going to cancel it all out. So make sure you dry your spools even before printing if you're going to do that. And definitely, especially sensitive filaments like PETG, engineering filaments, TPU, stuff like that, make sure you are taking extra good care of those filaments if you are in a high humidity area. Another thing that you can definitely change is your cooling and your print settings. You can have custom settings just for the summertime where the cooling, you can increase the fan speed, you can add more fans, or you can just put a fan on it, and that can definitely help if you're having issues with, say, PLA softening and having the same issues that I was. That's basically what I did, was I just added another fan to bring the temperature in the room down. So that's definitely something that you can consider doing. You can increase your cooling fan speed on the printer, and that will essentially do the same thing. For me, I didn't do that because I had 11 printers all at once, and I needed to control the entire room temperature versus just the one printer that at a time. I'd figured just using one big fan rather than adjusting all 11 cooling fans would probably work a little bit better. And you can also consider the time of day that you're printing. If you're printing overnight or in the early morning before things get super hot in the afternoon or late morning, that's definitely something to consider. You'll probably have better results then. And also, if you are using something with an enclosure like a Bamboo Labs P1S, if I'm having lots of trouble, then I'll just leave the door open. Just leave it open. It works. You don't need to have the door closed, especially if you're printing PLA. It's not a big deal. And once I did that, my prints were definitely turning out a lot better before I got the mobile AC unit in there. Another thing that you can definitely check out is the thing that I use, the mobile AC unit. You can keep track of temperatures with a $10 thermometer. You can get them on Amazon. They'll tell you the temperature. They'll tell you the humidity in the room, and you can take the necessary steps to avoid it. You can just turn on your AC if you're in your home. That's definitely going to help the most if you use air conditioning. But if you are going to just be using air conditioning or any kind of fan control, make sure you avoid just blowing it directly onto the printer. If you can, have it blow in areas where your printers aren't, because that extra airflow could hurt your printer, especially the bed adhesion. And with that being said, that's all I have for you guys today. I hope that you guys learned a little something about printing in the summertime and understand that summertime is probably the hardest season to get consistently good 3D prints churning out. But if you take the right steps of making sure that the temperature in the room is regulated, the humidity in the room is regulated, your filament is dry, and your print settings are correct, then you should have no problem achieving successful 3D prints during this hot season. Thank you guys so much for listening, and I'll talk to you next time.